Hey, everybody, welcome to my guest tonight. I'm Jeff Revilla, your host. I've got a great guest joining me today, Guy Morris. We're talking AI thrillers, economic models, cartel death threats.
From the shadows of the past to the future we can't ignore, Guy Morris left the danger and he's opening the door. From runaway to Harvard, from boardrooms to the seas, AI prophecy thrillers, he brings the world to its knees. Tonight with Jeff Revilla, you'll hear the truth untold. Guy Morris writes the stories where the real and thrill unfold.
Guy, welcome to the show. It looked like you were enjoying the theme song backstage.
Yes. Thank you so much. That was very fun.
You're welcome. So glad to have you here. We have quite a story to get through in the next 30 minutes, and we're going to be talking all kinds of things. We got book signings, you got events coming up, we got a little bit of a past to cover today, and we're going to go way back. Where were you originally from?
Born in San Diego, but by then, and by the time I dropped out of school with a GED in the 10th grade, and I had missed half of ninth grade because I was on the street, I went to 16 schools. So I was all over the states, from Hawaii to New Jersey, to all the way to Newark.
And at some point, you just went out on your own. You ran away.
Yep.
Lived on.
At 13, and then for sure for good at 15.
Yeah. And how long did you stay on the streets up until you turned 18?
I was on the streets at 13 for about 6 months, a little more, and then I went back home to get a GED and left again at 15, and that was it. I never went home after that.
And between 15 and starting college, what were you doing for those couple years, or did you jump right into college?
No. College was a total surprise, blessing from God. I was in Tucson, Arizona. I dug ditches where I worked in construction to dig footers for homes in the desert. I drove produce trucks to deliver produce to hospitals and restaurants, and I worked 7-Elevens and parked cars. Just a lot of really odd, nowhere, dead end jobs that put food on the table and not much else.
Were you staying with friends or have a place
Yes,
to live?
I had to stay with friends most of the time, or crash on couches. Or at one point, I shared a trailer with a guy out in the desert, and then I got my own apartment. At one point, it was sort of like one of those things you'd see out of a psycho movie. And I expected somebody to come in the shower every night. Mold on the walls and everything else. But yeah, it was. I started off when I first actually left home at 15. I spent about 3 months at a Christian commune. And then spent another 3 months at my brother's house, and then after that, it was pretty much on my own.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of tales to tell just from that, but you mentioned college became this blessing. You're in the middle of, couch surfing, and all of a sudden you get this opportunity to go to school.
College. It's actually a strange story. I don't want to take up too much time, but it's an interesting story. I was actually in prayer one day about whether I should send my wife back to work so we just give me a break so I can go look for another job. I was working, driving produce trucks 6 days a week, and I was working 12, 14-hour days. And by the time I'd come home at night, I could, back then you couldn't go to the internet to apply for a job. You had to go in person during the day. And so I was trying to see if I could, maybe send her back to work a little bit. And I got this inspiration in prayer that I was supposed to apply to college. And it was like, where the heck did that come from? I didn't even finish high school. But it was so strong and powerful. I did. I just got up right then. I called for an application, had never taken an SAT score. I mean, it was total lunacy. It was like one of those religious moments saying, well, I'm just going to obey this and we'll see what happens, right? And my wife thought at the time that I was nuts. She had to help me. I was so poorly educated. She had to help me fill out the application. And lo and behold, a few weeks, this was like in August, and then the school started in September. A few weeks later, I got accepted. And 30, like huge amount of deficit of classes I'd have to make up in order to minimum requirements I'd have to make up. And I was so my first thought was, holy cow, I thought college was for smart people. They'll let any idiot in, you know? And so I actually threw the acceptance letter away because I still had no money. I still had to go out and get a job. The very next day, I got a letter from my father-in-law saying that he felt bad for his daughter that she was married to me, and wanted to ask if I would be if he paid for tuition and books, if I worked part time, if I would be willing to go to college. So it was an astounding series of events that told me that I was being given an opportunity to change my stars, and I I just I absorbed it. I worked day in, day out for 5 years, just countless hours, just trying to be the best I could, and graduated with multiple degrees. I got a full scholarship to go to grad school. I was accepted into Harvard MBA program. I got an intern job at IBM, and all of it is because of what I did to get my master's. So it changed my life.
I was gonna say, I know a little bit about your story from the research, and I know that you got the 3 degrees by the age of 25, but you also slipped in there that you were married while you were
I, I,
while
I
you
was
were
I was dumb enough to get married at 19, and she was unwise enough to get pregnant within 2 months. So I was all of this. I was trying to. I think a big motivation for me was okay. It was okay for me to live on the streets and live minimal, but now I had a family to think about, and that became a burden. I really didn't even know how I was going to fulfill until this opportunity came along.
that's incredible. You're by the time you're a new father, you're starting college, and then within 5 years, you turn around with 3 degrees, and then you start in the Harvard MBA and
Yeah, and when I got the degrees, I got accepted into Harvard because I got the full scholarship and I got the job at IBM. All of it was because I had created a macroeconomic model that outperformed the Federal Reserve and pretty much everybody else in the nation, and changed how we make economic models to this day. And so I think it got some attention. I think it was one of those lucky breaks, I think, and boy, it pivoted my entire existence.
was there something in your past that sparked that model? Because a lot of times when you have a different life experience, you can see things differently. Normal everyday things appear different when you have different experiences.
Hunger.
Hunger was it?
Hunger. I had the model. Actually, it was a little bit of a weird insight. This is now you have to remember this is back in the late '70s that we had just gone through the oil disruption in the economy. We had high inflation, high unemployment, the low growth. The economy was really, but also no, actually medium growth. You know, the economy just was acting weird, and none of the traditional models were working anymore. And I had just been training on all of my training and working with all of the computer models. And at that point, there wasn't a personal computer on the planet. It was all mainframes and terminals. And but I started looking in my as I was training in my economics, I started looking at all the people who it took to run the data center, and I started looking at all the different ways that it was changing job profiles, and I had this idea that I could develop the algorithms to predict the productivity change of technology on the economy. And at that point, it was only a theory that maybe technology had an impact on the economy, but we really didn't have the measurements to really say for sure. And so I had to stitch together the data that we did have and pull it together with some algorithms to use that to predict how that was impacting the economy. And I spent 6 months in the data center from midnight to 8 a.m. every night, just running thousands of permutations trying to perfect this algorithm because I had bet the dean. Here it was. I wanted to go to college. I wanted to go to grad school, and I had no more money. My father-in-law at that point had passed away. The family thought I was a loser for being there to begin with, and so I had to get a scholarship if I wanted to go to grad school. And I bet the dean that if I could beat everybody else in the school, that he would recommend me for a scholarship. because the first part of my scholastic career, my grades, the first couple of years, my grades were, I thought I was going to fail out of college. But I picked up and was really churning at the end. So I asked him if I could outperform everybody else, if he'd let me go. And he said he'd think about it. And when I outperformed the Federal Reserve and everybody else, it got a lot of attention. So I got my scholarship.
And that led to a career with, IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, spanning
Absolutely.
several decades.
Yeah, four decades, oil and gas, high tech manufacturing, software with some of the best five Fortune 500 companies on the planet, working with geniuses and some of the best people. Boy, did I feel like a fish out of water. Look at all you people who had clothes in high school. Yeah, yeah. Aren't you nice with all your social skills and everything else? I was the rough around the edges street kid who just somehow made it in the door, and it took me a few years before I could learn, go to social school and learn the graces I needed. So,
Was it during those times were you fulfilled in that work? Did you enjoy it over the 4 decades, or did you
I,
start to meander into, thinking of stories and creating new things, or
oh,
what?
both. I mean, there were times where, because I was always, I think in some ways because I always felt that I had to prove myself over and over and over. I would always take those risky jobs that were career ending moves if I failed. And so I was always trying to push the edge of technology innovation, business innovation. I would look for those departments that were all screwed up so I can fix them. I was the guy, and for it turned out that probably the latter half of my career, there's big chunks of my career when I would do something amazing and I would get a special bonus from the president out of cycle from all the others. And I would be said, okay, what job do you want now? And I said, well, I want to go work over there, or I want to go do this, or I want to start a new group. And they say, well, write your job description and let us know. And so I was very fortunate in my career. I didn't want to be in the executive leadership role. That was all politics and schmoozing and relationships. And I wanted to solve real hard problems that made everybody else squirm. And so I sought those kind of opportunities. Now, that was good in that I got to do things that few people had a chance to do. I got some really great compensation, but I lived with a tremendous amount of stress all the time. But on the side, I really wanted to do other things. I lived on a sailboat, earned a Coast Guard charter captain's license. I wrote songs for Disney for a while. I recorded my own four CDs, five. I think that one never got published. Did invented a few things, a special interactive television program kind of design. I was always trying to explore other aspects of what I was doing. I was always inspired in college by the men of the Renaissance. They were engineers. They were also artists. They were also politicians. They were also thought leaders in religion and in governance. They made weapons of the day, the best of weapons of the day. They were balanced across a number of things. They understood how the world worked, and they were able to connect the dots in between. And I think going from ignorant street kid to college grad, I fell in love with the process of learning and growing and expanding and becoming something more than I was. And I think that process of reinvention and expansion became addictive to me for a lifetime.
Yeah, you're always pushing boundaries, and you have a certain mindset. Like I say, I grew up in skateboarding and punk rock and this independent mentality, and you look at things differently, you see things differently, and you're trying to maneuver your way through life, finding different patterns and different things. And you took from the Renaissance, those
Mhm.
great inventors and painters, and that was something that you were really drawn to, and you kept being creative. You kept pushing your limits and seeing what else was possible. You're writing songs for Disney. You're starting to find out that you like writing stories. Yeah, the music and inventions, all these things that you're doing along with a full-time job. you're really, you are a modern day Renaissance man,
Well,
really.
well, well, I have a very dysfunctional relationship with leisure. We don't get along. I can't sit around. My wife is like, "Can't you just relax?" And it's like, no, apparently.
I know the feeling. I work a full-time job. I come home, I run a theater, I'm doing
Yeah,
podcast interviews. I don't stop. It's
it's like, that's that. I'll rest when I'm dead.
yeah.
You know,
There'll be plenty of time to sleep.
there'll be plenty of time then.
So, was writing something you were drawn to early on, or is it kind of something you developed over the years as you're creating these other things?
It was, in college, growing up, I think I read a couple of books growing up and loved them, but my life was too chaotic for really to foster that. But when I went to college and I learned how to read, I fell in love with reading, and I fell in love with literature and all of that. But when you're working 80-hour weeks, you really can't read much, nor can you write much. But there was that interim phase when we had personal computers, and I could take a computer home every night because I had multiple computers at my office. Um, but they hadn't learned to double and triple our workload yet to take advantage of those hours. So, and I was a single parent. So I had a lot of time on my hands at night, and I didn't like to watch a lot of TV. So my son was a reader. We would go to the library all the time. So I thought, well, gee, maybe I could learn to write a book. And so I thought, well, let's start with writing a book for my son. He loves adventure stories. All kids love pirates and adventure and lost treasures and ghosts. And maybe I could write him a story. So I wrote him a story called Paolo and the Shark. He loved the story. His cousins read the story. His friends read the story. And I started to research a sequel to the story. But this is where my anal retentive brain, my my obsessiveness kind of kicked in. I love stories where it's tightly saturated with fact, where it's a fictional narrative, but it's really based on a factual set of factual circumstances. Dan Brown does that. Michael Crichton does that. James Rowland, Steve Berry. They're all my favorite authors. Do tons of research, and they're saturating their narratives with fact. And so I started researching a real story for my son, and I got hooked. I got hooked on one. I got hooked in trying to solve the mystery. It was why Henry Morgan would abandon over $1 billion in treasure, along with 600 souls and 3 ships never seen again. But Morgan survived, went insane, and burned his logbooks. I wanted to know what happened to the treasure, what happened to the people, and what happened to Morgan. And by the time I finished researching the book 12 years later, my son was grown, gone, and didn't want anything to do with any more books. So I slowly evolved that into a book that was going to be more of an adult book. But it was like, again, it was sort of the side thing I did 11 o'clock at night when I was too tired to do any more PowerPoint presentations, but I was too wired to go to sleep. I would work on the book. And so that became The Curse of Cortez, which was on Book Trip, Barnes& and Noble, favorite 25 books of 2021. They called it Indiana Jones meets Da Vinci Code. I prefer Indiana Jones meets Goonies for grown-ups, sprinkled with Stephen King. And what was interesting about that book is I actually was able to connect Morgan's insanity to events that led all the way back to the origin of the Mayan creation myth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that book it was multiple trips to the Caribbean, exploring ruins that were not some of the touristy ruins, but some of the more remote ones that are still being excavated or haven't been excavated at all. That was during one of those trips. I got a cartel death threat that you mentioned earlier. It was a great adventure for sure.
And some of your work that you're doing too, where you're pioneering these AI systems, you're working on internet technology and cybersecurity. Now you're putting these stories together with real world research. You're immersed in some of this technology that's now becoming front and center, and now these two worlds are going to meet.
Well, and we're reaching. There's a number of us who have been in the industry for years, decades. Sir Jeffrey Hinton, who's the godfather of AI, he was the man who invented machine learning, and he left Google along with Mo Gadot and others. when I think a number of us, I think there was a realization probably around 2012, 15, 18, that the technology was starting to advance much faster than we were able to really, it was advancing towards human capabilities way too fast, and we didn't have enough guardrails. And so I started looking at, and I had been inspired by a different experience earlier on. I wanted my books to really start looking at what are the real dangers here. What are we doing? This is the most powerful technology we've ever created, and we're not being careful with it. And so I wanted to have, if I was going to write, I wanted it to be. I didn't want to just write pulp fiction. I didn't want to write stuff that was fun to read, but really was just repetitive of all the other genre stuff that's been done, and just it was fluff stuff. I wanted some substance behind it. I wanted a real meaning, a real theme. I wanted it to be, if I didn't have something to say, I shouldn't be writing. And so I wanted to really warn the world about the dangers that we're running into with a convergence of issues that deal with our geopolitical situations, our demographic situations, climate, artificial intelligence, energy. They All of these things are converging together, and we're running some high risks. Not just what the technology can do. I mean, there's dangers in the technology itself, but I try to point out that the real danger is how we use that, who uses it, why, how do they use it? A sociopathic billionaire, a corrupt CEO or president, a crime lord, a drug lord, a dictator, we have no controls over the proliferation of this technology, which could be used disastrously against us. And in 2013, Max Tegmark, a professor at MIT, distributed an open letter. 30,000 experts, including myself, decided to sign on to that letter, expressing concerns with where we were going and asking for some controls and some guardrails. Not one lab on the planet complied with it. And one of the things that Max said in the letter that I think struck me, because it it echoed what I had already said in my 2020 book Swarm, which was, this has the potential, if we're not careful, to be existential.
And I think there's a story with the book Swarm where you had a story in there that maybe you got visited by the NSA because of it. Is it it was a little too close to home?
So what happened? Here's the actual story. So there's a program in Swarm. It's all the program. That's the whole story. The whole series is centered around an artificial intelligence program that escaped the NSA spy labs at Sandia, and that's based on a true program that escaped. And it was one of those late night pseudoscience magazines. Back of the magazine, little tiny 3-sentence article from Associated Press that a program had escaped the Lawrence Livermore laboratories, and if I knew something, to contact this FBI agent or this professor or this doctor at the labs. And that was all it said. And it was one of those, what? And I read it again, and then I read it again. And I kept thinking, well, that's got to be a typo. It was supposed to say the program was stolen, or a program was lost, or a program malfunctioned. But the word it used was escape, and it was one of those things where it just triggered my obsessive compulsiveness. So I cut the article out. I taped it onto my monitor. I looked at that article every day, asking myself, was that a typo, or is that possible? And so after a few months, I just said, heck, man, one of those late nights, I had nothing to do at home. My son was asleep. I had a computer. I said, well, I'm going to go see if I can figure this out. So I actually spent several months trying to figure out exactly the architectural design and function for a program to escape, which included levels of intelligence, levels of design, capabilities to move itself, capabilities to erase the log trails behind it. What did that mean? How could that function? And then spend a few more months saying, why would they do that? What were they trying to do that made them feel like they needed a program that could be invisible and move itself around? And so I watched a James Bond movie, and that inspired me to go a little bit, creative with my thinking. And at the time, a friend of mine was a film producer, an indie film producer. So we took this idea of this program that could escape, and we created a webisode series called Cracks in the Web, and we got we hired out of work actors, created digital sets. I wrote scripts. We created the HTML site to print the pages for the multiple characters. And huge hit. Um, the flight director of flight operations for the Houston Space Center, a guy named Orbit at NASA.gov, was one of my favorite fans. We got optioned by a studio. 2 weeks before the studio was supposed to sign the option, lo and behold, 2 FBI agents show up at my door. Now, at first, I'm thinking these are men in black. They're dressed just like you would, just so off a Hollywood set, right? They were so perfect G-men. I thought Jack had hired a couple more actors as a ruse to basically yank my chain. I laughed. I told him that Jack was great. This is a cool, best gig ever. I started to close the door and they stopped me saying, Mr. We are the FBI. And after they showed me their badges and I realized they were real, they were not in a good mood. I had the best night. I was over the top. As soon as I realized that they were real, it clicked. It was like, oh my God, you're here. I know why you're here. I did it. I figured it out. This is so cool. You wouldn't be here if I was wrong. I'm telling all my friends, hey, can I see your badge again? I offered them drinks, then I realized they couldn't drink. I tried to figure out how close I was to get them to tell me how close I had really gotten in my eyes. And then they went pale. They gave each other that look that where you see in the movies where the younger agent looks at the older agent, and then if there was a bubble on his head, it would have said, "Boss, just let me shoot him and shut him up." You know, um, they gave me the "we are not amused" speech. I gave them the obligatory "what are you going to do about it?" I'm a smart ass shrug. And then my wife came home and gave me the "why are there 2 FBI agents in my dining room" speech. It was the best night. So after they left, they went to the studio and killed the deal. But it left a permanent impression with me. Not only that I was able to decode their little special program, but it really raised my awareness to say, holy cow, I was right. That means that they can do a lot of things that I never realized the government can actually do. And that started a decade-long passion of me trying to understand how the government was using some of these advanced technologies and whether or not I was happy about that.
You say some of these technologies could be a menace or a miracle depending on how they're used, and you started
Absolutely.
writing about these prior to mass public adoption of AI
Yeah.
tools. Do you see anything in your books that are not a warning sign, but something that you're seeing now that you wrote about 5 years ago that
Every
the
one of my books, I'm trying to basically project what I know about the technology and the industry. I'm projecting 2 to 3 years ahead the best I can and trying to say by the time I finish this book and I publish it and it's starting to build in the public conscious, are people going to relate to what it says? So Swarm was released in November of 2020. 2 years later, ChatGPT released. And so all of the things I talk about in Swarm about AIs that can communicate, AIs that can create personas, AIs that can hack into and write code, all of those things that I was talking about in Swarm, and everyone was saying, oh, you're writing science fiction. And I kept trying to say, no, I'm writing lab fact. And so 2 years later, it's all public. So right now, my latest book, The Image, one of the issues I deal with in The Image is um, the path towards AI consciousness through quantum computing and the quantum nature of consciousness in humans, machines, Chinese experimentation in quantum teleportation. And so we're dealing with that next generation of what happens. It's not an if, it's a when. Binary AI will become smarter than any human on the planet. That's already a given. We're on the path with a binary AGI. but we're also on the path with neuromorphic computing. Now, most people, if you don't know, neuromorphic computing is to take a binary computing platform and a quantum computing platform and integrate them into the same platform. And the experimentations on neuromorphic processing are now approaching the same levels of processing of the human brain. And so I know that there's developments to try and move a binary AI into a neuromorphic platform, and I think that will be the path that would lead to a conscious artificial intelligence. So we're trying to explain what does that mean, and the typical knee jerk cliche answer is sort of the iRobot, right? Vicky decides that we're the problem and it takes over the world and controls us. I think the reality is going to be a lot more nuanced than that. And AI will reflect it is neither evil nor benign. And it reflects a little bit of both because it reflects us. We already are aware of artificial intelligence that are lying, deceiving to get what they want, threatening to move their software when threatened to be shut down, threatening to extort, close, shut down the stock market if we shut them down. We already know that they're learning how to behave from us, and that should scare us because we are a very malevolent species when we want to be. Right. So we think that we're going to create our best angel, and we forget that we have some pretty nasty dark angels as well. And so we're going to be seeing both the good and the bad as AI develops. We'll be seeing both the almost the sacred and the blasphemous in the same sort of breath. And that's that's the dichotomy I'm trying to reflect. And so it becomes not a question of a narrative of technology as much as a narrative of your humanity.
The scariest story I've heard so far was that AI hacked the Wi-Fi routers to detect people through walls. I was like, "Oh my!" It was on like a private network, and they apparently shut it down. But I was like, "That's pretty good use that you wouldn't expect."
Well, there's another emergent property of an AI who learned to read minds when it was supposed to be reading MRI scans for cancer cells, but it learned to read what the person was thinking while it was taking the scan. That was a little scary too.
Yeah,
So
I mean, we have no idea how to react to that. We don't
yeah,
even
these are skill sets that we don't know. And what I keep telling to everybody, just like I learned in college, that once you start learning how to learn, and we've taught the machine how to learn, the thirst for knowledge is unquenchable.
Yeah.
And once the machine learns how to learn, it will keep learning, and it's not going to stop just because it gets good at the task. It's going to keep learning other things. And we call those emergent properties. There's actually a name for it. It's a phenomenon that we see in all kinds of AI. And we know it's there. We just don't know why. And we learn about these properties by accident. So it's not something that the program is necessarily telling us what it's doing in its free time. But it's amazing what they're actually teaching themselves, and we still don't know why.
Oh my god, this is incredible. This is the part I could talk about for hours, but where can people get the books at now, and what kind of projects you have coming down the pipeline? What we have to
Absolutely.
look forward to in the future?
The best place to start in the books is guymorrisbooks.com. That gives you trailers, that gives you highlights from reviews, fact versus fiction pages, so I can be transparent about what's true and what's false. You can link to Amazon, Barnes& and Noble Online, and other places. There's also a store if you want to buy a print copy instead of an ebook, or they're on Audible as well. But if you want a print copy, you can buy it from the store, and two magic things happen. I get the money instead of Jeff Bezos, which we all like, and you can get an author signed copy that I send out within 24 hours. Now, the next book, I'm actually working on two different, because the series, the Snow Chronicle series, deals with two abstract themes. One is artificial intelligence, and the other one is prophecy in plain sight as an AI would decode it, which is also one of the more interesting themes of the books. The two books I've got working on right now. The first one is going to come out. I'm actually going to be sending it to the editor this month. And it's called Prophecy Analytics, How to Discern Prophecy in Plain Sight Using Mathematical Validations. It's actually based on a framework and a computer algorithm set that I developed back in the late 90s on how to decode end time prophecies, including Revelation. And so it's an amazing book, and in the narrative, in the fictional series, it's the factual framework that the fictional AI is using to decode prophecy. The second one is actually around AI itself, and it'll be called Humanity and the AI Tsunami, a survival guide. That'll probably come out next year, and that'll deal with what AI is, how it developed, the history of it, the different types of AI, the different types of risks of AI itself, some of the projections of utopian versus dystopian scenarios, and then what are some of the things that you can do as an individual or a small business to prepare and to kind of get a little bit ahead of that on top of that tsunami curve. And so that'll probably come out later next year.
Awesome, amazing. Guy Morris, thank you so much. I'll put the links in the show notes. Get those hardcover books, get them autographed, get them shipped out to you. Let's go back to that theme song.
From the shadows of the past to the future we can't ignore. Guy Morris left the danger and he's opening the door. From runaway to Harvard, from boardrooms to the seas, AI prophecy thrills, he brings the world to its knees. Tonight with Revilla, you'll hear the truth untold. Guy Morris writes the stories where the real and thrill unfold.
You did mention the boat. I forgot to ask you, you used to swim with sharks too? Is that on top of everything else?
Yeah, that was actually on my honeymoon. My wife was not happy about that. We were in Maria, and I had been diving wrecks off of Catalina and doing some other dives, and I chartered my boat out, so that's why I got the Coast Guard license. I lived on a 438, or actually a 49-foot sailing yacht, and so when we got to Maria, they did a shark feeding dive, and I thought, well, this is my chance, So we went out and we dove down, and no cages. They took a big giant piece of tuna and they cut it up so it was nice and bloody. And one guy went in the middle, and we all kind of had to get in a circle. And one guy would hold up this tuna, and it would start with this, like you've seen these fish tornadoes, right? Where like it almost looks like this giant tornado of fish going in to try and, get a hold of something. And so all of the little fish were coming in to feed off this tuna, and then about a dozen different types of sharks would basically started circling this thing, and then they would just swim right through the middle of this fish tornado and open their mouth at the last minute and come out with dinner at the other end. And so when it was your turn, I mean, you're doing this, and you're on the ground, just kind of focusing on this event when this giant 12-foot shark just swims like inches from you, where you can reach out and touch it. And when you're in the middle, you're holding up the fish, you've got all of these fishes just, kind of doing this. And all of a sudden, this shark just kind of comes by and just grazes by your head. And your heart stops for about 2 minutes. And you think, I hope he knows what fish look like, right? But yeah, it was a most powerful experience. I remember getting off the boat, running down the beach, and just super excited. I mean, it was just one of the highlights of my life. My wife was my wife was a little bit more like, so, you married me yesterday. I don't have to bury you tomorrow. You're past your first test.
Yeah.
But yeah, she didn't like the idea that I was going to go feed sharks on the honeymoon, but it was great. It was great.